Hello. I have never given a full and honest testimony in my life, especially regarding Christ, which is what this is really all about. I just want to put out there where I came from and how God had his hand on me my whole life, and I didn't even know it. I started getting high when I was about 10 years old. The first time I got high, I thought I had found the answer to life. I immediately became rebellious with my parents at school. Um, but I was still, really young. So I was just being a brat and getting high. Well, by the time I was 12 years old, I had moved from getting high to trafficking in marijuana and hash. I had two friends who were several years older than me. My whole life, everybody I ever ran with was older than me. I was always the youngest one in the crowd, always. I'm the only child. So, by the time I was 12 years old, we had accumulated, me and my partners, we had quite a load of marijuana. And I had my mom actually let me and them, she let us smoke weed in the basement because her theory was it would be better for us to do it there and not be out on the street getting arrested. But she had no idea what we were really doing. And we were trafficking heavy. My parents had a big upright freezer that they hadn't been using for a couple years. And I don't mean to laugh to sound like this is anything good, because this is not. This is just my life. And some things are a little humorous. But we had a bunch of pot, and since we were keeping everything down in the basement, we didn't want it to get moldy, musty, smelling anything. So the thinking was, let's just put it in the freezer, and that'll keep it fresh. We had about 32 pounds of weed in there, and my mom went down one day to do laundry and heard the freezer running, and I was at school, and she investigated the freezer, and she flushed everything and destroyed all the stuff, all the posters and lights and everything we had down there. She just tore it up. And that particular day I come home, I had brought a little girlfriend home. I was going to show off, look at what I got. And I seen the results of my mom finding what I had, and being a young, prideful, sinful kid with no sense at all, I retaliated by destroying the house and then running away. The girl I brought home, by the way, ended up being my first wife. Not then, obviously. I was 12 years old. So, moving forward from there, since we lost everything we've been working for, our greed took over and we wanted more now. So we moved from trafficking in dope to robbery and B&Es. And I was involved in quite a few robberies, armed robberies, serious ones. And I was even on the outside edge of a kidnapping that 3 of my partners went down for, and it just so happened that I went the other direction. And we were solid back then. Nobody snitched on anyone. So, I never went down on it. And the statute of limitations is over now, so I'm not worried anymore. Now it's just a matter of, I'm forgiven. When the kidnapping occurred. My partners left out of state, and I stayed up this way in Ohio and formed a little crew. And I was okay. I had money and dope, but the two new guys had nothing and they wanted something. So I set them up with a broad daylight robbery, which is the one I ended up getting caught. We got caught for. It was between junior high and high school when this went down. And I was charged with aiding and abetting an armed robbery. And my partners were charged with armed robbery because they were the ones that actually committed the crime. So I did a little bit of time juvenile right there. And when I come home, I had a whole new attitude because I didn't like jail at all. I did not like it. It's not no place to be. Which, well, you'll see here. So I had really had a change of heart, and I went back to school. And because of my past and reputation, everything I did was under the scope. And they actually tried to, or they did. They kicked me out of school several times. Which the one time they kicked me out, I was old, and I was actually going through driver's ed to get my license. So actually, this is in high school now, obviously, and I got kicked out, which caused me to fail driver's ed, couldn't get my license, and instant rebellion again. And it's funny how you think you know what you're doing at that age, but really you're just an idiot. So I went back to what I knew, start dealing drugs again, and got into acid. And that was a whole new experience that I thought was really great. My whole life after the first time I got high was a mission to find the best high on earth. So I had met my first love, I thought, and doing acid all the time. And I had a really, really strange spiritual experience one night and thought that I'd met God. And some really strange stuff happened. I ended up in a church that I had no clue what anything was, so I believed everything they told me. And these people were like supposedly prophesying and doing all this stuff. And like a year or so after I started going to their church, it was a husband and wife doing the pastoring. They took all the money from all the tithes, which out of the bank account for the church, and split. So that was my first experience with Christian. Oh, I forgot one part that was kind of cool, and how I ended up meeting God. But it was on acid that the change came about. There was a youth group, Christian youth group, this guy had started. He lived between me and the school, and he came up with this plan to have the kids form a 10 most wanted list. It was the first time I've ever been number one in my life, because it was me. I was number one. My girlfriend was number two by default. It's just by guilt by association. So these kids agreed to pray for me and her every night, and everything started falling apart. All my connections started breaking down, and I thought it was so strange because of all the tripping on acid I was doing back then. I honestly thought that I had done something to get the cosmos out of line with where I was. And then my girlfriend broke up with me, so I lost all my connections. I actually had a house at 16 years old that I was rent-free. That's some deep stuff there. The way that was going, there was a lot of cocaine, a lot of drugs. Period. Well, within like a 30-day period, everything that I had rolling was gone, including my girlfriend. It was in January. This was in '79, which we had a blizzard that winter, and like I said, I thought I'd upset the cosmos. So I actually went home to my mom, and I was broken. And I said, "Mom, I need help." Uh, she, I ended up going to. I got into the mental hospital, checked into a mental ward, because I thought I was losing it. I was losing it. Um, and the first morning there, I was in line for breakfast, and this girl come up from behind me, tapped me on the shoulder, real pretty girl, and said, "Are you Christian?" Immediately, oh man, I know why you're here. I said, "No." She said, "Well, I think you're going to be a bright, shining star for Christ someday." And I was just like, "Yeah, okay." Grabbed my tray, man. I could kept my distance from her as much as I could. She didn't speak to me again. I was only there for 3 days. But that night, after she had said that to me, it just echoed in my head over and over and over and over. And I didn't know God. Actually, up to that point, I would argue with people and say, "There's no God. There's no God." But inside, I knew it was. And I sat up in my bed that night, and it was the first real prayer I'd ever said. And I could repeat it for you right now, verbatim. "God, if you're really there, I want to know." And that was it. And of course, I looked out the window. I was waiting for thunder, lightning, something. And I was like, okay, nothing happened, no God. And then it was like about a month or two after I got out of the hospital, I was trying to put everything back together. The blizzard was happening, and my girlfriend called me, and we had broke up, but she called me and she wanted to get back together. So I hitchhiked through this blizzard in '79. I went quite a distance to get to her, and I had acid. So as soon as I got there, we got settled in and we dropped some acid. And that's when I had that experience where I thought I met Jesus, literally. And I was on fire. I thought, I'm saved, And I didn't know anything about the Bible, know nothing about nothing. So I ended up going back to my mom's, and of course she tells the neighbor about what's going on with me, and her daughter and I were the same age. So her daughter comes up and says, "I heard you got saved." I was like, "Yeah." She goes, "Are you going to church anywhere?" I said, "I'll go anywhere. The doors are open." She said, "Well, let's go." It was like on Tuesday, and I said, "Church on Tuesday, really?" And it was the youth group. So when we got there, all these kids that I've been going to school with are staring at me, and they're smiling I'm like, what is wrong with these people, man? And that's when they told me about, the 10 most wanted list, and they'd been praying for me, and boom, here I am. And the guy that was running, the adult that was pastoring us, I guess you would say, hands me a Bible. He said, "We signed this the night that we put your name on the list." And I opened it up, and it said, "To Rob, a new bright shining star in Christ." And that just freaked me out. I was like, and I was on fire for a while, but I wasn't getting any depth in my heart. I stayed on the surface. I was riding this feeling that I had, and after about a year, I faded away. And things were worse than they were before. I was right back into selling dope. I had a motorcycle now. It's so weird. It's like my whole life, God would let me get right to the edge of destruction and pull me back. And I was heading down a serious path, motorcycle-wise. And I had a job. Everything was okay on the outside, shiny on the outside. And I, after work one night, went down to the rode down to the park. Me and a few other guys. We were drinking for 3-4 hours. I finally decided to go home, and went around this curve on the wrong side of the road and hit a car head on. I was literally stuck in the windshield from here to here. I don't remember this part, but they said I put my hands next to my face and literally jerked my face out. And when I was stuck, they said I wasn't bleeding. There was a little blood coming out of my nose. But when I jerked my face out, it cut the top of my nose off and opened my throat up. And when I came to, I was sitting in a ditch, Indian style, like this, and there's already a cop there. And I looked up and I said, man, I don't feel good. I'm going home. He says, buddy, you're not going anywhere but the hospital. And he stole my watch. I remember that so clearly. This cop took my watch off, and he said, I need to take that off of you. I was like, I'm out of it. I'm like, okay. But after I got out of the hospital and everything, I went to the police department, to try to reclaim my stuff. He said, you didn't have no watch on. I was like, whatever. But anyhow, I got another motorcycle before I could even walk with the insurance money. And life went on. And I ended up, I don't know, it was about a year later, I ended up leaving state. I moved down to Lexington, Kentucky. And I was down there for a few years. And the young lady that I told you about that I had brought home that ended up being my first wife, well, she came down to Kentucky to stay with me. And I had an apartment, a job, and, for a kid my age, I was like 17. I was going on, man. I thought, but it really wasn't. So anyway, she gets pregnant, and she split and came back to Ohio. I stayed there. And the night she had my first son, I drove from Lexington to Cincinnati, saw my son and her, and I went back home, Kentucky. And that stayed that way for several months, and she started coming down and visiting every weekend and convinced me that we needed to get married and be a family. So I got married and lasted about 6 months. She was the day that we got married, before we consummated our own marriage, she left in my car and went and seen this guy she'd been seeing the whole time that I was in Kentucky, and consummated things with him. And I didn't know it. A few months later, a friend of mine told me, and I asked her point blank. She turned white and admitted it. And I was violent back then, so that was not pretty. And that was it. Well, I gave her several chances, and she kept doing it, going back to the same dude, and just didn't work out. So anyhow, just a couple years later, I get this other girl pregnant. And I'm already paying child support, and I don't like it. I'm a young guy. Still, I'm full of sin, full of pride, rebellious, hate the law. And I could not even imagine having to pay child support on 2 kids. So I stayed with this one. And she gave me my second child, which was my daughter. And got pregnant again, just like that. A year later, my youngest son was born. That marriage, we were together for like 16 years, but the whole time we were there together, I'm selling dope, and I'm more organized now, and I'm getting older, I'm getting smarter, a little wiser, got all kind of connections now, and opiates actually came into the picture in the late 80s, and I knew that was the high that I liked. That and shooting cocaine. So of course, what was it, 93? 93, they finally got me. Some dude that I knew come in wired, bought some weed from me twice, and then he come and raided my house. So, and because I had actually my whole adult life, the only thing I had were DUIs, which is bad enough, but I ended up getting probation, 5 years intensive probation, and I walked it. I had a job, I had a child, three children really, but I had two of them in my care and a wife and a house. So they gave me a chance, and I did it. I walked 5 years of intensive probation. Uh, but I couldn't get high then, but I could sell dope, and at that point, because I wasn't using it, I was making a ton more money. Except for my wife, she smoked like a freight train. But I was not happy where I was. The only reason I was with her is because I didn't want to pay child support. I cheated on her constantly. I was a wretch in every sense of the word. And some stuff happened, and children's services came in. My daughter actually got this one because I think she was like 14 years old and made me a grandfather. And she decided that she was going to take control because she didn't like what I was doing and she didn't want her son around it, which I can understand. That makes a lot of sense. But she goes to school and tells the principal and the counselor and I'm not at home. And when I got back, this all went down. There's nobody there. And the lawnmower just stopped where my son had been mowing the yard, and it was just, I was like, what is going on? I get in the house, and there's a card stuck on the TV from Children's Services. And I called them. I was like, what's up with this? And they said, well, you're going to have to do this, 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 and this if you want your family back. I said, well, guess what? Click. And that was the end of my second marriage. That's when heroin and cocaine really took over. And I went at it hard for a couple more years, actually several more years, and then made it all the way to 2000, and my youngest son got arrested for meth, and it did something to me, and I immediately, I was like, this ain't gonna work. The example that I've been is why he's doing what he's doing. So that was my first effort in life to straighten up. My mom went to the hospital and died. She didn't get to see any of my progress at all. I went into just at the end of 2000, beginning of 01, I went into an inpatient program, stayed for 6 months, came out, and life turned around. I didn't have God in my life, but he still had his hand on me, and I didn't realize it. And I went from one job to another job to the greatest job I ever had in my life. And I was middle class. And I thought, wow, I did it. And I was a heat treater, hardening steel, case, all that kind of stuff. And I thought I was somebody. So one night at work, I told my helper, I said, you know what, man? I said, as long as I got this job, I'm cool. I don't need nothing else. And about a month later, God said, guess what? You do need something else. You need me. Lost my job. And I'd been living according to those wages. And ended up, man, it got tough. Before I got that far, after I got clean, I started having really bad headaches, and turned out I had a collapsed disc in my neck. I had to put 2 plates and 6 screws in my neck, and this was in 05. And because I was dead set against any drugs, but I was having so much pain, they sent me to pain management, and they put me on methadone. I said, well, wait a minute. I said, isn't this for heroin? He said, no, don't worry about it. He goes, you will feel it for about a month, and then you won't feel anything. I said, oh, okay. So, and he was right. and I was cool. I was cool, but I was taking it every day, 40. And I was only taking 40 milligrams a day, but I was on it for 7 years. And as my jobs progressed after I lost a good job, I got into another position where I started out as a cashier in a convenience store, worked my way up to manager, and I didn't have insurance, and Ohio put a some kind of system in where they have to um, go to this website to see if you've been anywhere else, any other doctors shopping. So my family doctor, who was providing my methadone at that point on a sliding scale, decided that whatever this was that the house was doing was going to be too much trouble, and he didn't want to deal with it. So all of his pain patients had to go to pain management, and I didn't have any insurance, and it was way too expensive. So I thought, well, how bad can this be? You know, I've cold turkeyed heroin several times, so this can't be any worse. yeah, it's worse, 10 times worse. And I was at work. I had rode my motorcycle to work, and the sickness hit me, and I thought I started calling 911 a couple times. I called in a cashier to come to work because I couldn't even do my job. I got my deposits together, and I'm sitting in my office trying to figure out how am I going to get home. And all of a sudden I had this brilliant idea. Where my store was located, there was lots of dope boys that came through. So I thought, you know what? I'll just walk back over because I was in my office. I walked back across the lot to the store and started watching the guys that came in. And it didn't take long. I found some heroin. And my thought was, I think this was my thought, but my thought was, I'll just do heroin until the methadone clears my system. Then I'll quit doing heroin. And that lasted for about 3 days, and I started getting high. And of course, I couldn't afford it, so I started selling it. Well, my youngest son at this point had been in prison. And he gets out of prison, finds out I'm back on heroin, says, hey, Dad, I met the plug while I was in a joint. And he gets out in a couple months. I said, well, cool, let me meet him. And that was the beginning of a hardcore ride. This is not an exaggeration, and it's not bragging, it's just what happened. Within a month of meeting this guy, and we set up business, he worked the city. I was out in the country. People that were coming from my direction to the city, whenever he would, when somebody would come down, he'd say, wait a minute, you don't have to come down here. You can go to this guy out there. I'll give you his number. He'd call me and say, look, so-and-so, blah, blah. I said, okay. Within a month, I was moving over a 1/4 pound of heroin a day in grams. Now, I didn't sell nothing. That was the smallest thing I sold was grams. Never got caught. Task force actually went to all my neighbors' houses and wanted to put cameras in pointing at my door because they was trying to build a case. And of course, my neighbors come and told me, and I ended up walking away from that house, which was my parents' house, which was now mine, which, because of the situation, I just let it go. And I start renting a room from some people, and I paid my rent in heroin, and I start trapping out of there. And that got really hot, and things fell apart. And next thing I know, I'm living in the woods. I'm like, what is going? Man, this is getting bad. This is going from worse to worse to worse. And I caught a charge for possession of heroin, but I only had a little bit, so it was only, in Ohio, it was an F5, punishable probably up 1 year in prison. I'm going to court for that, and I come out of the courtroom after we had everything set up. I was going back to rehab, and I get slammed against the wall and cuffed, and they had an indictment for trafficking in heroin. I had sold a 1/2 gram to an undercover. And so now I got 2 F5s, and I go to court, and I was in county for a little while, obviously. I go to court and give me probation, and I walked the probation for a little while, and then I quit reporting. And They violated me. I went to prison. I was only there because all my county time, everything. I only had when I actually got to prison, I only had 29 days left. So I did that, and I got out August 22nd of 18, and I went into second day I was out. I OD'd on fentanyl, and I died. They had to bring me back, and I knew, it was like, man, I ain't gonna make it. If I stay on this, I'm not gonna make this trail. Excuse me. And so I went into a rehab, inpatient, and stayed there for a little bit. I went from that to this place that it's a shelter, a men's shelter, but it's a Christian-based place. So I'm getting exposed to the Bible again. I'm hearing the Word of God, and I start praying a little bit, and I got this apartment through government housing offer, because I can't work because like last December I had back surgery, major back. I got 2 rods and 6 screws put in my back. I have to have both knees replaced. 2 Aprils ago I had shoulder surgery. I've had this shoulder worked on twice already too. I have rheumatoid arthritis, and all the medicines, I can't take none of the medicines for it because you have to have a healthy liver. Well, because of my drug use, sharing needles, tattoos, whatever, I got hepatitis C, and I've had it for years. Now my liver is I'm in bad shape. So anyway, I get this apartment right here, and I love to read. I like reading more than watching movies, because reading I can become the character in the book. And then I decided that I was going to start reading the Bible at least once a day, 1 chapter a day. And as I did that, I started really thinking about where I've been, what I've done, and where I'm going. And I started thinking about all the people that I hurt I sold heroin. Nobody ever OD'd and died on my drugs, but I watched people literally start losing the possessions, then their house, their jobs, each other, go into prison. And when they go to prison, I just get another customer to replace them. I destroyed so many people by selling that stuff. I can't change any of that. And it's painful. It's real painful. But now, for whatever reason, God has called me out. He chose me. I'm one of His. And He talks to me every day in His Word. He even talks to me out loud when I read out loud. And I'm loving Him. I'm forgiven. By grace, by nothing of my own doing, I'm saved. And I'd never experienced tears of joy in my life until now. It's awesome. If I can just somehow overcome the guilt and pain that I feel for what I've done by selling death for years, I'm sorry. That's my life.